All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. So on behalf of ConvergeOne, thank you for joining us. We'll begin today's presentation after a quick review of your webinar console. So if you need technical support during the session, please click the question mark icon. The projector icon will open and close the slide presentation. The Q&A icon is where you can add any questions. We'll have time for Q&A at the end of the session, so please send in your questions if you have any. Obviously, we'd love to hear from you, and it makes it a little more interacting for Kathy and myself. So and finally, please click the survey icon at the end of the webinar and share your feedback on today's event. Also, one other thing, the person icon will show and hide the speaker bios for myself and Kathy. Other reminder is all phones will be muted during the webinar, so which is being recorded for on-demand playback. You'll receive a follow-up email with the playback link. So I want to thank you all for joining our presentation today. It's entitled 5 Steps Towards Proactive Cybersecurity for Contact Centers. So one of the things that Kathy and I are going to talk about today our goal is to really show how cybersecurity and threats in the landscapes can impact contact centers and folks that are taking calls. So my name is Chris Ripke. I'm a Senior Director for our Cybersecurity practice here at ConvergeOne, and I'm going to let Kathy introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kathy Sobis. I'm also a Senior Director here at ConvergeOne, but I'm in our Customer Experience practice.
All right. Well, Kathy and I are excited to really walk you through this journey and really how there's really big synergies around cybersecurity and what folks are doing in the contact center. So with that said, we're going to hit our agenda slide. So I'm going to just briefly touch about just cybersecurity and customer experience. Kathy's going to talk about expectations for vertical industries. I'm going to hit just some. The goal from the cybersecurity perspective is one thing I want to make sure we understand is there's some basic things that you can do from a security perspective and a program perspective to help alleviate a lot of the security concerns you may have within your environment. Kathy's going to talk about biometric authentication. We're going to talk about connecting the dots, and I'm going to wrap it up with some 5 ways that you can start in around the cybersecurity program and extending that into the contact center. So when we talk about cybersecurity, really, I mean, it's really just interesting because it's never complete. It's always changing. One of the things that we do when we consult with our customers that's extremely important is, anytime a customer ever comes to me and says, I'm 100% protected against any threats. I mean, that's just really a fallacy because the landscape is always changing and what that looks like, right? No customer is ever protected. One of the biggest things that we can do to protect ourselves around cybersecurity and program in general is to shore up and to create a security program so good that attackers just you make it too hard for them to engage your environment and attack your environment, that you have such a shored up security program that they come in and they just pass you by and move on to the next person. So that's what we always say, security is never complete. It's always changing because there's newer threats emerge every day. And especially when we tie together, the contact center, these things are, anytime you get breached, the biggest thing, if in the event you get breached, one of the biggest things that we have to worry about is new variants of ransomware are out there, where they're going to take your information and exfiltrate it and copy it to their servers. And what that does is, we'll talk about what that does in a minute, but that's customer data. That's data that can be used against your business. And so it's really important that you have a security program that can protect your customer data and not open them up to some of the things that we're going to talk about here from a customer experience perspective. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to take us through the next couple slides.
Thanks so much, Chris. I appreciate it. And I'd like you all to think for a minute, close your eyes if you'd like to. It's been a year. Actually, really, it's been over a year since we all moved home. So think about your home environment. Think about the environment that your employees are in. And when you have that mental picture, I want you to open up your eyes. Does it look like any of these pictures? Are there pets in your picture? Are they taking calls from their kitchen or their laundry room or their bedroom? Or does it look more like these, where there are children in the room with them? Some employees are staring at walls, wishing that people were around, but nobody's around. Our employees and those that are in the contact centers or with back office jobs never, ever thought that they would work from home. and their office doesn't look like yours or mine. Did you know that the number one piece of furniture that was sold last year was a desk? That's incredible to me. The situation not only caused all of us to move home and work remotely, it really fundamentally changed us. It changed the way we worked, consumed, and how we behaved with our family and friends. I don't know in my lifetime if I'll ever see it go back to the way it was, but here's some key trends that we're noticing. Fraud in the contact center started to explode from a rate of about 30% pre-COVID to now over 60%. That exponential increase was also caused by an exponential increase in traffic into the contact center, and talk times were increased as well. A myriad of things were going on. In fact, according to JEP.com, contact centers saw an increase of 300% more calls, and the average handle time jumped from 3 to 6 minutes to like near 10. Just a crush of work volume, demands from home, fear of the disease. There's so much that's going on here, and it really hasn't changed much since all of this happened last year either. So let's think about this. As we mentioned before, fraud's kind of on the rise here, with the majority of it coming through the contact center. Your employees are at home. They're in situations like they were in before. And that means too, that more than half of the phone calls, emails, chats, and texts that have come into the contact center really have malintent behind them. They want to compromise or take over that account. Each call that's fully contained in an IVR or an IVA will have some increased savings as well, because contact centers on average cost about $8 to process a call. The addition of voice biometric not only helps prevent fraud, but it also helps increase containment rates in, again, IVRs or IVAs. And so, for example, if an IVR is getting like 50,000 calls a day, you'd see an increase in containment by around 1,000 or 2,500 calls per day. At $8 each, that gives you a savings of between 3 and 7 million. That's not too shabby. So think about the containment rate going up for you, the processing time going down for you, and the risk of customer privacy concerns being placed in check as well. CEOS Biometric Authentication is a group of different solutions that help our clients authenticate their customers using biometrics. And this is truly what people are, rather than what they know or what they can remember, like ID numbers and PINs, especially now with everybody at home: customers, agents, you, me, and criminals. There are 4 primary industries where we see biometric authentication. Energy is one. According to Smart Energy International estimates, theft and fraud of electricity costs the industry as much as $96 billion every year globally, and then $6 billion of that is in the United States alone. This $96 billion global problem not only results in higher prices for all of us paying consumers out there, but also costly government subsidies, and it's a danger in some countries where they have illegal power connections. In the healthcare industry, according to a report by Cigna, healthcare fraud is a crime. It's committed when a dishonest provider or a consumer intentionally submits or causes somebody else to submit false or misleading information. And that's all for the purpose of determining, the amount of healthcare benefits that are payable. In banking and finance, there's a magazine called Fraud Magazine. It really does exist, so you can see how prevalent it is there. Bank fraud involves the use, again, of these fraudulent means to obtain something of value from a financial institution. And there's a ton of different types in bank fraud. And it includes identity theft, account takeover, loan fraud, wire transfer, and check fraud. And guess what? In government, the Department of Justice actually has a website on fraud, and it lists 16 different types of fraud, of course, ranging from bankruptcy, disaster-related fraud, Social Security fraud, tax, and of course, cybercrime. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Chris.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. So just hitting on some of the things that Kathy touched on from the contact center and the explosion of folks and fraud being on the rise with in the onset of COVID and people working remotely and contact center agents working remotely. As you can see here on this slide, one of the biggest things that we talk to our customers about is, cyber risk, right? So risk is is defined from a cybersecurity perspective is how likely are you going to be, based upon your security maturity model, your vulnerability assessments, and how vulnerable you are to attacks, right? We create a cyber risk, right? So that's the number one thing that businesses are really concerned about this year, as far as with COVID and just the cybersecurity landscape growing, right? So one of the things that that add to that, basically, the 80% of digital assets are in digital forms. 53% of organizations that they expect to be attacked within 12 months, right? It goes back to what we talked about creating an environment where your defenses are so strong that attackers will move on and not really look to try to infiltrate your organization. Some of the other, one other highlight here is information assets that are insured. Only 12%. So when we talk about the onset of fraud and fraud being on the rise, one of the biggest things we can do is create a security program that will help protect the data that can be used to from bad actors to really create fraud within the contact centers, right? So that's from a cybersecurity perspective, that's one of the things we're going to want to make sure we touch base on today, and that you guys understand that. So the business, the cost of cyber breaches are staggering. This is a number. I think it's just immensely. It just grows immensely over the course of the past year, and it will continue to grow. It's $8 trillion of the cost of cybercrime. This is including things like the cost of business interruption, the response and recovery efforts, right? So do you have a really good DR plan to that includes the cyber recovery in the event of a breach? Most DR plans and disaster recovery plans only count natural disasters. They don't include things like what happens if we have a security breach and what that looks like. So that's where you see like the $3.86 million is the average cost of a cyber breach, and then that's just across the board from throughout the industry. And then if the more you're recognized in the market, right? If you see here, the Fortune 1000 companies are 2 times more prone to cyber attacks than smaller businesses, right? But that doesn't mean that smaller businesses are really off the hook in regards to cyber attacks. One of the biggest things is you look at the maturity model of larger companies. It may be really good, but also all it takes from an SMB perspective is just someone to click on a piece of ransomware, and it doesn't matter what size organization you are, you're all affected the same way. So then this is something that we talk a lot to IT organizations around the cybersecurity resource skill shortage. There's 2+ million job openings within the cybersecurity market, right? So what we're seeing, there's 5 million openings globally. One of the biggest things we're seeing is a really big skill gap between the skills required to manage today's security infrastructure and what the market is providing from folks applying for jobs. So there's a really big difference between what is required and what the market is giving us. So we're seeing a lot of customers not being able to respond to attacks in the way they have in the past, because attacks are becoming a lot more sophisticated, and you have to take into consideration things like data privacy, looking at vulnerabilities, having a really good vulnerability management program, which includes vulnerability scanning and maybe penetration testing over the course of the year, really to really continue to assess your risk within the organization. And one of the things, like what I talked about, we're seeing a really big gap in what the market is providing and what businesses actually need to protect themselves. So this next slide is really the 5 basic tenets of security. So why we talk about this is these are really the table stakes to any really good security program. We talk about these things all the time with our customers. We have a security program assessment that we do that's called WAVES that uses a lot of these things as basic tenets of it. So the first thing that I want to bring to mind is obviously build next generation security controls. I mean, that's perimeter at the endpoint. That's everywhere, right? So to decrease your attack surface, and it's better to have an ecosystem of security controls that work together across multiple attack vectors. And what I mean by an attack vector, that could be things like, endpoint. That could be things like email. It could be, other things like a network firewall, right? That's called an attack vector. That's an area in which an attacker can kind of penetrate and break through defenses. So when all of these, when we talked about creating an ecosystem of controls, when they all work together, the data from each of those controls feeds into a central console and provides a really good foundational view of your threat profile across all of those attack surfaces. And that's what we talk about building those next generation controls, because if you have visibility into your security landscape across all of those things, you're going to be better, you're going to be set up to better respond to an attack when it's occurring within your environment. Number two, the patch frequently and often. I mean, I can't stress this one enough. This is the number one reason why folks get attacked, right? Because there's always 0-day vulnerabilities out there, but as attackers, what they do is there's these things they're called CVEs, and they're critical vulnerability export papers that are published, within the security program, and they're identified vulnerabilities, and you probably have seen them out on the market for things like Microsoft and Cisco. And attackers, what they do is they wait for these published vulnerabilities to be out in the market, and they said, okay, all right, Microsoft, Cisco, you just gave me the blueprint to infiltrate customers. And what they do is they wait. They wait to see if you're going to patch that vulnerability, and if you don't, then you're susceptible to the hack that was defined within that published exploit. So this I can't stress enough is just making sure that you have a vulnerability management program that includes patching very frequently and often. This is the number one way you can decrease your risk profile within an environment and protect yourselves against published vulnerabilities that exist within the network. So this next one I think is really important, right? So knowing what your asset inventory means, and what I mean by that is understand what's included on your network, understand the devices and the systems that exist within your network. I was talking to a customer the other day, and they were shocked to learn that there was an unpatched Windows 7 machine on their environment that, and we all know Windows 7 is unsupported and there's no patching for it. But knowing that exists on your network, it could be a really big jumping off point for attackers within your environment. In that example, having understood what was connected to the network would have helped, prevent or really reduce what someone's risk profile looks like within the environment by either isolating that machine or finding some way to upgrade it to remove that unsecure operating system. So understanding your assets is something that, for folks that have, that want to have really nice, good security programs, mature security programs, it's a very important aspect of that. Safeguarding your data. So this one, we really hit home on this one with customers, because a lot of customers, and when we look at things like, when we talk about parallels around the contact center, if your customer data and all the things that you have, like account numbers, social security numbers, let's talk about banking, for instance, right? So social security numbers, account numbers, address, anything that could be used to personally identify someone, that could be considered like the crown jewels within your environment. Safeguarding that data and having a really good security control program around that and a backup and recovery plan around that is going to be paramount for you in order to recover or to protect that data in the event of a cyber attack. And then one of the things that I kind of hit on from patch frequently and often is make sure you're continually assessing for vulnerabilities within your environment. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the security is always changing, it's always evolving, right? So make sure that your security program includes all the all the latest vulnerabilities and is evolving with with the landscape as it exists today. So from a fraud perspective, I wanted to hit on this, and I think this is pretty important. There's been an expansion in growth in fraud. I touched on this around ransomware, right? So the explosion of ransomware and now having these ransomware groups actually exfiltrate data from exposed systems is bringing fraud to more light than where it has been in the past, because having all the data at their fingertips, they can call into a contact center and impersonate a customer very quickly with having all of that information at their disposal. And then one of the things that we talk about too is the failure to educate employees. That this is really a big thing, right? So if you're running a contact center, one of the biggest things we can do from an education perspective is to sit down and educate your employees on how to, the best way to pull information out from your customers and how to identify when folks are not who they say they are, and really educating them on gathering that personal information from the customer via the call. And then this is really the biggest thing is the lackadaisical attitude and poor decision making. So when we, whether it's for folks, even from a security program perspective, right? So we always want to make sure that we're bringing our best to our program and even from a contact center perspective, right? But we got to make sure that while we're receiving phone calls from our customer, making sure that we're not, we're really paying attention to the data that they're providing and the data that we're asking, because that really makes an impact. So I put a little screenshot here of a tool that we use that within our environment is called SpyCloud. So SpyCloud is a tool that what they do is they go out and they comb the dark web to really see if a person's email or a company's domain name, right? So in this instance, it would be ConvergeOne. It goes and looks at all the records that appear within the dark web. So as you can see here, I threw my email address in there, and it's pretty small, so I apologize. But it was in this sensitive source breach that occurred within March of 2020, and it got my email and it didn't get a password, right? So but this example here is just with tools like this, you can understand what your exposure is to from either from your customer's perspective or from your internal business perspective, to understand what data did get leaked within the dark web. So what you can do is you can be better positioned to prevent yourself, right? If there's just password data, then all you need to do is remind your folks to change their password. But if it's any other important types of data, then that's there's some other things that we can do to help prevent that. All right, so I'm going to turn it back over to Kathy to walk us through the next couple slides.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there, Chris. Thank you so much. So, I guess as I'm thinking more deeply about this, and I've been working with you on this for some number of months now, I think a lot of people could go, wow, okay, I can get all these tools and I can put them in and life will be good and phew, I'm done. But remember, these criminals don't sleep, right? And so it's really important to know that this is their number one priority and job, is to try and figure out how to compromise your data or your customers' data in some way, shape, or form. So while Chris was talking,
Kathy, with that, sorry, I was going to one biggest thing on that is that this is their primary source of revenue, right? This is how they generate income. So this is their job. It's their job.
Yep. Yep. And I think if you settle in on that and know that they work 60 to 80 hours a week on their job, that can then give you, a little bit more about this. It's been a frightening topic and one that I felt very passionately about for a couple of years now. And that was all these questions. So today, if you call into a contact center, a traditional contact center, and they haven't deployed any of the technologies that Chris has talked about or some of the ones that I'm getting ready to talk about, this is the experience that they would see. How can I help you? And then they start to go through this list of validations. Can I have your account number? What are the last four of your social? How about your mother's maiden name? And on and on and on. Guess what? The answers to that and many of those things are available either on the dark web or on your social media feeds. It's a little frightening to think about, but they're there, and you may have been the one that placed them there. So knowing that there are companies out there that can help provide solutions through ConvergeOne is something that could be beneficial to you. So how do we move from today's environment into the environment of tomorrow? Because this criminal here, and that YouTube video is very compelling. I'll talk about it in a second. They're out there trying to compromise your data, and they're doing it through social engineering. They're trying to take over your phone number or your email or the account number or medical records, and the list goes on from what I talked about before. But that YouTube video was taken at DevCon a couple of years ago, and one of the moderators said, sat down with a person that showed how easy it was to take over that person's cell phone account, called the provider, had a baby crying in the background, preyed on the sympathies of the agent, and within 30 seconds gained access into the account. So it may not happen that quickly. It may be a little longer for you. It could be that this person socially engineers a variety of different accounts. So you want to catch them when they come in 6 or 7 times on different accounts for different reasons. And through biometric authentication, you would be able to do that. Something else I want to remind you about, and the reason I took you back into the agent homes early on, was sometimes you don't know if it's your employee sitting in that chair anymore taking those phone calls or those chats or whatever. It could be their neighbor. It could be their spouse. They might want a little bit of a break, and the job looks quick and easy enough that someone else can sit in that chair. So authenticating not only for the customer, but authenticating the person that's your employee is a way that these particular products have been deployed. So let's get rid of this criminal, and we're going to do that from biometric authentication, which can be passive or active. So you can have people enroll if you'd like, but you don't need to. So the gentleman calls in, the woman says, man says, how can I help you? And might ask for the account number, just so that that person, you can get some speech from that particular caller or that particular interaction. And then guess what? They get a big green check mark that they've been authenticated, and they can move on from there. This can be done in the IVR. If your IVR is speech enabled, doesn't have to be. It can be done, as you see here, right at the agent's at the agent desk. So they're authenticated. When that green mark happens, what do you think? How do you think the agent feels? The agent's finally to the point where now they go, okay, I've protected myself and my company here, and I can move on with the discussion without asking them this other series of questions. By the way, that series of questions takes place anywhere between 20 seconds and a whole minute to get through those questions. What if your person can't remember their PIN number? What if they want to be authenticated in a different way? The other day, I actually called into a company and they asked me for a PIN number, and I started going, well, how many digits is it? And they said 4. And I said, well, how many guesses do I get? And they said, as many as you need. And I said, well, okay, let's start here. And, within 1 or 2, I guess I got into my own account. I'm not even fraudulent, right? That was my account. Yet this person was so willing to help me that they were willing to allow me that flexibility of trying to get into my account without compromised or resetting anything. So here's our fraudster, right? He's out there and he's calling in. And when he calls in now, I've recognized that he's called in multiple times. I've recognized that he's on a known fraudster list, or there's just something a little funny about him, and I flagged him. And it's really up to you what you want to do with that. Do you want, first of all, you've alerted the agent, which they'll probably go, oh my gosh, right, in their seats. But you've also had the ability now to stop the call immediately, flag the call and put them on a known fraudster list for you, or refer them directly to the fraud department. Hold on while I transfer this call, right? That kind of behavior can happen here. In addition to voice, there's other ways you can biometrically authenticate. And for a mobile device, you're actually authenticating still the person, because on a mobile device, you have the ability to do today, in many cases, thumbprint and facial recognition. And that opens up a whole new world for you with regard to any apps, mobile apps that you may have, and how you want to authenticate a person to get through to their own data, how you might want to authenticate them if they're escalating into a contact center as well. So there's many different ways we can do this, and the agent's desktop in some of these cases can be completely obscured. Do you have to know my first and last name and the city, state, my complete address, and my whole account history just to tell me my order's delayed? Probably not. And all of that data now that was on your CRM system in your place of business is now in somebody's home. So think about what we've asked our folks to do. I also wanted to go through and think and allow you to see some of the metrics that are around these. So biometric authentication in the contact center provides you outcomes in different places, right? Again, we can use our voice, our thumbprint, retinal, not seeing too much of that yet. Facial recognition, definitely, in order to identify that specific person and be compliant. And you can save money because of this operational efficiency. So it's really kind of cool that you have a solution that can not only protect you against crime, but it can also allow you to be more efficient. So for every contact handled here, you have shorter handle times, and depending on the numbers behind it, you could be able to change up the number of FTEs you have, or allow them to work on more complex issues if you'd like them to as well. So if each 500,000 calls saves us 45 seconds each, that's actually 6,200 hours of savings, and does result in 3 headcount for each 500,000 calls. So we're reducing customer effort, we're reducing agent effort here, and we're improving our net promoter scores and our customer sat scores as well. Let me go ahead and see if Chris has any additional thoughts before I turn it back to him.
I don't, Kathy.
Okay.
All right, so we're gonna. I'll take us through the last couple of slides here, but so I wanted to bring up to the topic of digital dragons, right? So for folks that don't understand what that is, right? So I'll read it from the verbiage here. It says digital dragon is digital giants, right? They're plus hyperscale cloud services. They're powerful ecosystems that include things like payment, logistical services, and expansion to non-tech sectors, right? So think of people like Amazon and Apple, and so if the companies are evolving, right? So they're getting into other areas that they traditionally didn't play in before, and to capture other areas of digital, whether it's e-commerce or payment systems like we talked about here. So, but they're expanding to things that they, the non-tech sectors that they haven't been good at, right? So when you look at and in order to capture the market and to create the agility that they need to build their new their ecosystem of products and services, they're using things like AWS, Microsoft, and Google Cloud. So what that's doing is it's increasing their attack surface. It also creates these other areas where you have to really define: are you creating your security program? Are you extending your security program into the cloud? Are you understanding things like what the shared responsibility model looks like? And what that is that, so based upon whether you're doing infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or from a cloud consumption perspective, there's other things too. There's function as a service too as well. But so basically, shared responsibility means what are you, the end customer, responsible for providing within the cloud environment, and what's the cloud provider providing as part of the you using or consuming their cloud service, right? So understanding where you have to create, and maintain a security program, and things like with data privacy, right? We see this all the time. We see that, especially in AWS, folks have S3 buckets, and that's a data bucket within the cloud. It's data storage. There are sometimes we've seen and for customers we go and take a look at, they have unsecured data repositories in the cloud where hackers can just scan those and gain access to any of the data within there, right? So that's what the idea of Digital Dragons is just as we're expanding and you're looking to do things, and that could be, it could be a lot of different areas, right? You're increasing your risk profile and your attack surface, so you have to maintain your security program and your controls to take more of a risk management approach to your security program. And this just kind of piling on to what the last slide was. So if for folks that regulations, they just now have teeth. And what I mean by that is they have very stiff penalties associated with data privacy laws. So if you've been tasked to maintain customers' data and keep that protected within your environment, there are things like GDPR that have 4% annual turnover, which is really, it's really high, right? So if you do business within the EU or have customers that are in the EU, I mean, there's things that you have to you have to be concerned with about protecting data. The big one in America is the California Consumer Privacy Act. CCPA obviously is they handle, it's basically if you have residents that are in California, there are laws that require you to adhere to very strict privacy regulations that that maintain and keep the customer's data private. There's also a new one that was on here that was kind of during the election, that Virginia just passed a Consumer Privacy Act as well. So Virginia is on this list as well. We see with healthcare, HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act is another one, right? So you have to maintain healthcare records and create a really good security program to protect those. And PCI, we see that as well with credit card information. So all of these regulations, they have very stiff penalties associated with with not maintaining customer data. I mean, forget about the penalties for a minute, but if by not protecting the data, the biggest thing that you expose is open yourself up to fraud and having your customers' personal information dumped out on the internet. I mean, and they're one of the biggest things that we talk about when we talk about NPS scores is really how much are you trusted within the industry, right? So folks like Apple and Tesla have very high scores because they're considered very trustworthy within the market. And if you have your customers' data exposed, you're going to be considered less trustworthy, and customers aren't going to want to do business, right? So making sure that these regulations are out there to protect the consumer and to build trust within the consumer and your business. So when we talk about this threat interconnectivity, there's a lot of things that go into it, right? So I mean, it's just you've got users and attack surface, you got the regulatory and the data, right? So they're all interconnected on how they work, right? So now these new things that we have to worry about are things like Internet of Things, like your Google Nest thermostat, or Alexa, or Apple has their Siri, and so you have to consider about how all those things are from an IoT perspective are interconnected. And what they do is they're just opening up a greater attack surface for data to be exfiltrated in the event of a cyber attack, right? So all of these things go into creating a security program and to mitigating risk within your environment.
I think the big thing here to think about as you move on, Chris, is really a more comprehensive program, right? Is one that's really needed here because, as we said, the criminals don't sleep. It's their number one job to try and compromise data and compromise the companies that we work with, and at a very high cost. So how can we help safeguard you is not to do one thing, but make sure you're looking at this more holistically and continually looking at this as a way you can protect yourself.
Yep, yeah, that's 100% correct, Kathy. I mean, the security programs have to evolve. They have to take into consideration a lot of other areas that they haven't in the past, and that's really that changing landscape that we referenced earlier in the presentation. That and you have to think about things like contact center, right? So making sure that when you're creating a security program, branching out to areas of the business to make sure that in the event of a cyber attack, that you include those areas of the business, right? So, okay, contact center, what happens if we have a cyber attack? What does that look like for you? How can we make sure that, we mitigate the risk within your environment and look at our overall security program? So you have to take more holistic approach to not just the technical side, but the business side, and that's what we're seeing in the environment today for our customers. So these are some of the things. These are some really good ways of just really trying to help look at from a cybersecurity, and then we talk about governance, risk, compliance. That's that regulatory piece that I talked a little bit about, right? So things like managed detection and response service. So these are key elements in helping protect your environment. These are companies that if you have security controls within your environment, what they do is they monitor those controls, and in the event that they detect a threat to your environment, they will call you and alert you and provide you some basic remediation tasks that you can do on your own to help mitigate your risk, right? So these have been these services have been a great way for you to decrease your attack surface, and it really helps bring peace of mind to a lot of our customers that we position these services to. Risk assessment, I talked a little about too. So that's the cloud and vulnerability risk assessment. So the biggest way you can protect your environment is to understand what the risk looks like for your environment, right? You have to define that. You have to understand things like what assets are in your environment, what systems are vulnerable, right? So that defines what the risk is from a cybersecurity perspective. And then once you understand that, you just create a plan on just mitigating that risk and shrinking what that looks like. But risk also has to include areas of the business as well. So that's, the cloud and vulnerability risk management is a really important element in a proper, cybersecurity lifecycle program. So the awareness and training aspect of it too, this is something that I always call it like the unsung hero of any really good security program, is because the end user training is one of the biggest ways that you can dispel any cyber attack in your environment, right? Because 94% of ransomware attacks occur, via email, and we all know a lot of times email is a very interesting attack surface, right, or attack vector, because I got an email the other day from some service, that says, okay, hey, this is, click on this link to verify a PayPal charge against, this service that you subscribe to. I was like, okay, I logged on my PayPal, I took a look at it. I'm like, well, I didn't subscribe to that. Obviously, that's a phishing email, right? So understand what that looks like. Understand, educate your employees to how they can react efficiently. And one of the biggest things, a gentleman I used to work with, what he's telling me all the time is if you can't verify it, just delete it, right? It's one of the biggest things to do is just delete it. And if it's that important, they'll resend it again. That's really good advice that I've got, and that I hope will ring out for some of you on the call. The other thing that we want to hit on is the account takeover and credential theft, right? So that, we use the tools like I mentioned, SpyCloud. So understanding what data is out there on the dark web is a really good way to help protect yourself as well. So understanding what that looks like within your environment, what data could potentially be out there on the dark web, and tools like SpyCloud. There are other tools in the market too, but that's a vendor we partner with. They're really instrumental in understanding your exposure on the dark web. So when we bring it back down to kind of how five ways to start. So ways to get ahead of any attackers that could potentially exfiltrate your data and create fraud within a contact center, right? So we talked about this, and this is probably one of the biggest things that you can do, is make sure your security programs include ways to protect all areas of the business from risk. Understand what the impact to each of your revenue-generating departments, what they are, right? Contact centers are revenue-generating department, right? Because you've got folks, handling calls that, essentially, placing orders, receiving orders, or moving money throughout, from a financial perspective, moving money through accounts, right? So make sure that you protect them, and from a cybersecurity program perspective, make sure that all those areas are extended to be included within the cybersecurity program. Educate your contact center employees around fraud prevention. This is something that, at least every year, if not every 6 months, making sure that they're attuned to the latest tactics from a fraud perspective. And that's very important, right? Because tactics change when the landscape changes. So being attuned to what that looks like is very important for your frontline workers that are in the contact center. Kathy mentioned how biometric authentication can help protect your customers. This is a really good way of helping remove any risk associated with fraud from. It doesn't 100% remove it, right? But it decreases it, and it helps protect your business from fraud, right? We use it today. We've got any time you've used things like like Facebook or some of these things like Office 365, and they have this two-factor authentication, right? That's kind of what that looks like from a biometric authentication, right? It's just another means of authentication to validate the person is who they say they are. Talked about managed detection and response. This is a great way for your business to really understand the threats that are impacting the business as a whole, right? So understanding that visibility, understanding where you potentially could be vulnerable, right? That's a really big key aspect of maintaining a security program. And then conduct risk assessments and cyber attack tabletop exercises every year, right? We always talk about the risk assessments we talked about, but the cyber attack tabletop exercises are really important. What those do is that a lot of the businesses have done disaster recovery planning, and they do tabletop exercises, right? So let's say anytime someone comes, a natural disaster hits, what do you do? What systems do you restore, and in what order, right? How long does it take you to get the business back up? Cyber attack tabletop exercises basically do the same thing, okay? It's like you get all the responsible parties in a room and you walk through what would happen in the event of a cyber attack, right? What systems would you get up first? How do you validate if the data is 100% correct and I have the right data I need to restore systems in the event of a cyber attack? So these things help reduce risk because what they do is they allow you to feel very confident in knowing that you can restore in the event of a cyber attack. And that's one of the questions we really talk to our customers about is, how confident do you feel in your security program? And how confident do you feel that you could adequately respond to a cyber attack? And you'll be shocked at a lot of the answers that we get in that aspect. And this is a really good way to help, bring that sense of normalcy, or not really a sense of normalcy, but really just trusting in the fact that your security program can respond to these things and mitigate a lot of your risk within the environment. So with that said, I'm just going to open it up if there's any questions. If you have a question, please dump it in the Q&A panel, and Kathy and I would love to answer it.
Yeah, Chris, I just wanted to comment on your tabletop exercise. I think that's a really good one, right? And I think a lot of our customers that are out there listening now can start with that. Even if you just all get in a room together and start discussing what would happen in the event of a cyber attack, or what happens when you have a lot of personal identity theft happening in your environment. Either one of those is a way to begin. It opens up the door for you to say, where are our weaknesses that we can identify, yourselves. And so I just love the idea of that. I think that that's definitely something that we could do. I do see one question coming in on our broadcast here at the bottom. And so, Joe, think about some of the customers. I'm getting a question here that says, that have used our solutions. Can you talk to me about the results that they've gotten?
Yeah, Kathy, the one of the thing I'll tell you is from a results perspective is there's one customer, specifically it was a city out in California. So a lot of the the things that we consult about, right? So they were hit with a ransomware attack, and they had the security program and the correct recovery mechanisms in place in order to, so you make a conscious decision when you get attacked, right? Are you going to, if it's ransomware, are you going to pay the ransom, or are you going to just choose to not pay it? And are you going to use and have trust in the mechanisms that you built? Like we mentioned, the tabletop exercises, right? Are you going to trust in your procedures and in all the investments that you've made? Are you going to trust in that to actually restore and basically remove that attacker from the environment and just continue to carry on? And this customer was able to do that. They had a really good data protection system in place. They had a really good cybersecurity program, and they were able to not pay the ransom and just put into place and to practice all the things that we consulted with them on. And it's a really good testament to helping customers protect themselves against cyber attacks.
Well, that's great. That's great. I have another one that has come in. I'll take this one. It's regarding biometric authentication, and it's how hard is this to put in, right? What do I need to do or have in my environment in order to have this be effective? We will work with you to determine what your environment looks like in order to answer that question, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all, but there are some of the services that are consumable via the cloud, and when you have services that are consumable in the cloud, then you're only paying for what you're using, right? So you're paying more of a usage fee than a broad brush fee. So in other words, if you only have certain customers, and I would never advocate this, I think it's for all of your customer service groups. But if you wanted to trial it out to see how it would work in your environment, that could be a way that you could consume it for a portion of your environment and then broaden it out as we go along. So that's what we would recommend. But we'd like to talk with you, and we'd like to talk with you about what your environment is, what you're trying to mitigate, and how we can help, whether it's through the security assessments that Chris is talking about or the biometric authentication pieces that I'm talking about as well. Chris, there's another question that came in. This is probably more relevant for you. It's around waves, and so I know that that's been something that I think a lot of our customers have valued. Can you talk a little bit more about what's involved in a waves assessment, what the customer is expected to do or bring to the table?
Sure, absolutely. So waves is really our programmatic kind of approach to really identifying any gaps that you might have within any your cybersecurity program, right? So it helps identify your current maturity model, and then what we do is we provide a list of any gaps that we may see within your security program. And what we use industry standard benchmarks or frameworks to measure against things like NIST CSF or the CIS, the Center for Internet Security Top 20 controls, and those all go through into into our questionnaires that we ask, right? So Kathy had the question really had asked really about what does it take from a customer perspective, right? So waves assessment is a assessment that we offer free to our customers to help them identify gaps, like I had mentioned before. But one of the biggest things that we ask right from our cybersecurity practice is to make sure that we have folks that represent all areas of the business, and from a strategic discussion perspective, to make sure we get the best picture possible of what your program looks like at any as a whole, right? So if we're asking about, in your larger environments, we ask maybe questions around network security controls, right? So if those are handled by the networking department, we want to have proper representation from those individuals, as well as the security folks as well, right? So one of the biggest things that we that is, if we have proper representation and folks that all come to the meeting and can answer questions that help paint that picture of your security program, the better the assessment will be for you, and it'll help identify any gaps that we can work on together to help remediate within your environment.
Great, great. There's one final question I see coming in, and it's all around compliance. You had a slide. The question is, you had a slide showing the different compliances, and how do the solutions that you're talking about help help companies be more compliant. Can you comment on that?
Yeah. So the solutions help maintain compliance, right? So there's a lot of that goes into that, right? So every security program needs to have a system of measurement associated with it, right? So if you handle credit cards, PCI is the compliance framework that helps you measure against protecting their personal information, their credit card data, right? It's and the things like NIST-CSF is a framework that if you're not handling things like payment card information, or if you're a healthcare provider, those are things that allow you to measure your security program to identify any gaps that might exist, right? So the compliance side of it are we looking at there's all these compliance frameworks that exist within the industry. Basically, what compliance in GRC does is it says, okay, my security program is X. Does it meet the requirements from this compliance guidelines that I need to be a healthcare provider? Does it meet the needs for me to handle payment card information, right? So that's how those two work together. And we use things like, we'll do things what's known as a gap assessment for our customers, that if you're adherent to things like HIPAA PCI and you have an upcoming audit coming up, we can sit down and do a pre-assessment with you, and we'll come in and look at any potential gaps you may have within your security program that you would need to fulfill before your compliance, your actual audit, to maintain those credentials. So hopefully that helps, Kathy.
Yeah, I think that's great. I don't see any other questions in Q&A for either you or I, Chris. I would like to take a minute and thank everyone for joining us today. And, we're here to help. We hope this was educational for you today. We hope you got a little bit of information on how you can get started, a little bit of information on what an ROI might look like for you, especially with biometric authentication. And we hope that you reach out. Chris, any last words?
I just want to thank everyone for their time, and if you have any questions or any follow-ups, when we want to talk about cybersecurity, your program as a whole, feel free to reach out to your account manager, and we can help get engaged and help work on any initiatives you might have. So appreciate everyone's time this afternoon. I appreciate everyone for attending.